Broadly, this weekend in football, we've seen the topic of being humble explored on some levels. Obviously, the use of Kendrick Lamar's song Sit Down, Be Humble, due to Mars Lewis Skelly's celebration, imitating Haaland's humble celebration after he told Arteta to be humble, who himself has told other people, or given certain messages to certain people, or certainly shown his own humble nature, after coming away from Pep Guardiola, who himself was humble, who went up against a manager, Jurgen Klopp, who himself showed some elements of being humble, but some people showed some elements of being arrogant. But then after he's left the league, some other people are speaking about the things that he spoke about, and yet they are not labelled as arrogant. There is a lot of misplaced humbleness in the Premier League, but there's also a lot of competition to be humble. And to an extent, there is a competition at the moment as to who is the most humble club. And so I wanted to talk about where we sit in this. Some people might say you're inserting yourself into a rivalry between Man City and Arsenal, but Liverpool play an important role in that rivalry, considering that we have been the arch rivals of Man City for quite a few years, as have Arsenal been some of our arch rivals for quite some years now. And it's interesting to look at the dynamic and how humility, or humbleness as I called it a second ago, is important in winning a title, and why absolute dominance, absolute perfection is actually a very boring way of winning a Premier League title. And, you know, some people may even say that in itself, making that claim is arrogant. But there is a need, I think, within the Premier League, and there has been a need for some time now, for a bit of a rejig, for a bit of a shift, for a bit of a change in who is at the top of the league and who is competing for that title. And Liverpool have certainly been interesting, or the most box office blockbuster side, in terms of, wow, I really want to watch that team in recent years. Part of the reason that people are interested in this era of Liverpool and why it changed from the Brendan Rodgers era to the Jurgen Klopp era into the Arne Slot era, and there have been different forms of humble throughout that, is because of the story. I've said this throughout our Liverpool journey with Jurgen Klopp, but before that as well. You can't deny that Liverpool are box office. Whether they win, lose or draw, the game is interesting. The game is something that people want to look in on. And constant, and maybe that is by in itself not a very humble claim to make. There is not much humility in saying that you're worth looking at. But for me, it seems like something which is relatively subjective in order to make an objective claim. And that is the Premier League, right? But surely humility is about the subjective. It is all in the opinion. Some people think that what Arsenal did, the celebration that they did, in itself was to humble the opposition. But it has clearly got some sort of sting in the tail, shall we say, from everything that the unhumble Haaland said to Arteta, and his own dynamics is why he felt that he was able to say that to a much more experienced coach, someone who had so much experience in the game that maybe he didn't have. Maybe that is youthful exuberance. Maybe that is the lack of humility that some young people can sometimes have. Or maybe that is the demeanour that a striker needs in order to believe in himself in the Premier League in different moments. And maybe people change throughout their lives. I myself have been humbled by football. I myself have been humbled by the football space. And I'd imagine that you have as well. Be that through posting on social media, be that through claiming a player is amazing or terrible, or saying that a team are going to win, or whatever it is. Football, by its very nature, by the variance in the game, will humble you at some point. At some point, you will get your comeuppance if you play a game enough. And especially if you play a game properly, you will be humbled. Part of playing life properly is that you are humble. And again, it comes back to the claim, I'm more interested in my own journey with Liverpool than I am in Man City's journey. There was a social media clip not long ago. You'll forgive me, I don't actually remember the gentleman's name. But he was on Lab Bible, I think, and he was talking about, in recent years, Man City have been to Wembley so many times that his son is bored of going. That he is almost bored of winning trophies in itself. Now, in itself, that isn't an arrogant thing to say. It didn't feel like an arrogant thing that he was saying, but it didn't feel humble either. It felt kind of boring. It felt a little bit like, my God, like the actual success of what is going on around your club, something you have lacked for such a long time, has now come in such a concentrated form that you don't even enjoy this. I don't want that as a Liverpool fan. It's why I was against some billionaire owners coming in of some sort of state. It's why I'm often maybe more interested in the story that goes around Liverpool. It's why I'm really interested in this current team. It's why I'm interested in what Arne Slot has to offer this Liverpool side. It's why I'm interested in Michael Edwards. It's why I was interested in Jurgen Klopp. It's why I think this few years of battling so hard, trying so much for the title, falling short multiple times, and I don't mean that in a judgmental sense, I just mean they didn't win the title or they didn't win the Champions League or whatever it is, has meant that this team is inherently humble. It's not that they don't have a swagger. It's not that they can't play with a little bit of flair in their game. That is not... There are plenty of players who are humble in the game who also have flair, if that makes sense. Maradona in himself had an arrogance or a kind of a steely joie de vivre for the game, which wasn't about being arrogant, all right? It wasn't about also being humble. But, you know, with it being El Pibe, or all these little elements which go into your story, not all of them are going to be humble. Some of them will be hero-making moments. But what we want in our heroes, what we want in the people that we look up to, is not necessarily the humility, but the reality and the understanding and the knowing that they bring with their position of power, which inherently feels humble. All of the Liverpool team have got elements where there has been humbling stories in recent years. The tragedy of what has happened to Alisson. I don't want to use that. I don't want to use someone else's own awful life experiences as part of my own idea or story. But what I will say is, I think what Alisson has been through in recent years and his way of dealing with it, his religion, his own approach, his own heroic actions in a time which was clearly really tumultuous from him, shows an element of humility. Trent Alexander-Arnold comes from humble beginnings, you know, without wanting to sound too middle class, comes from humble beginnings and has been taken on a journey by a manager who taught him how to have confidence in his own game. Even if inherently he was already a confident person, having those people around you. I remember when I interviewed him for my Jordan Henderson documentary. God, don't go on about it, mate. We get you did a documentary once. Shut up. That's humble. He spoke about how when he was coming into the team, people like Henderson gave him that opportunity to have a voice. They gave him, because Henderson believed in him, he felt that the rest of the senior players could believe in him. And the humility that came with that, the confidence that came from someone else, is inherently humble. Konate, an inherently humble player, someone who comes from humble backgrounds in France. Van Dijk has been humbled in his own ways. Some people would say the aura means that he's not humble, but I think there are plenty of things that come with a confidence and a self-assuredness which cannot be mistaken for arrogance and actually show the humble element of your game. The injuries that he had in recent years, the hard work he's had to put in to recover from some of those injuries, those are inherently humble. Andy Robertson inherently comes from a humble background. Alexis McAllister, equally, part of his humble gameplay is that he is so empathetic and sympathetic to the other players on the field. He reads the game really well, makes them better players. That in itself is a humble element to have. Ryan Gravenberch is humbling after leaving Ajax, going to a big institution, hoping for better and not getting it, coming to Liverpool, working his way back up. Dominic Szoboszlai, some people say that kid is arrogant, but there are elements of his game where the effort, the inherent drive and the need to serve the rest of the team, the runs that you make, all those kind of selfless elements of his game are incredibly important. Luis Diaz and his father, Luis Diaz and his background, Luis Diaz and his self-sacrificing number 9 play or false 9 play for us is huge. Cody Akpo seems like his religion is a huge part of his humble personality. These are all things that have been incredibly well researched by Liverpool as an institution, but also on an individual level of Jurgen Klopp, which go into making a side humble. I'm sure every other team could go out there and of course Mo Salah, but you know, Mo Salah's inherently, I think as a striker or someone who plays in that position, you need to have an element of self-belief, but it's not about being humble and self-belief aren't mutually exclusive. Those two things can often be brought together. And the sting in the tail that Arsenal had over the weekend is that mean, I'm going to show you what I really am, which isn't about being, it's not about being humble yourself. It's about just remembering your overall dynamic as a personality. People throughout your life will try to humble you. Believe me, I've been humbled by people that I do not want to be humbled by because I do not believe those people themselves were humble or those people themselves could use me as that sacrificial lamb for their own gains, for their own views, for their own self-image. That's not me, right? Where do I go from there is kind of my question. Anyway, sometimes I want to put these things out online because I've found my name on forums recently where people have been mean. And sometimes it just wears on you. Talk about finish on the humble. City inherently with this project, there was something humble about the club before. And to an extent, the story that they've told, the way that they've chosen to tell it has not always, should we say, extolled the virtues of being humble within the game. There are inherently humble elements to where Pep Guardiola comes from because of his adversity as a Basque native. They were always the same in Johan Cruyff's game, in the Cruyffian idea of football, the self-sacrifice, the understanding, the need to be a student of the game. All of those things are really important, right? But inherently, football is a humbling game. So while we're busy making a competition about who can be the most humble, which team, I think, and by the way, off the back of this, because Arsenal have inherently knocked another team down, brought another team to their knees, there will be this worthiness now. And this storyline that Arsenal are now the most worthy side within the league, Liverpool themselves, therefore not as worthy as Arsenal. There is this wave of confidence and everything else that comes with that. That's really important, right? Be ready for that. Be ready for some of those storylines. That's why they celebrated so much. There was a great release of this energy which had been pent up over time. And I think that's really important. Like these things, these narratives play into really big overarching ideas which feed into your energy and the crowd and the relationship with the crowd, the relationship with the club, the relationship between all of these different elements. Part of that is the humility to understand that in its fullest. At our core, a lot of Liverpool fans still remember Shankly, his idea of being humble. He didn't want to discuss the difference in religions at the club. He wanted to be men of the people. He wanted you to remember what it felt like to wear the badge, which is why some people feel inherently upset about what is going on with the way that the Trent story is playing out, even if in reality, Trent in himself is a humble person who has his own humble ideas of where he wants to go. Other people feel this maybe opposite of humble, the idea that there is an institution there that is bigger than him, all those kind of things. Being humble very often will appeal to your ego because it's a great way to appear to other people, which is why it goes all the way back, this competition to being the most humble and therefore the most worthy for the league title. I'm sure there are great Arsenal fans who could go through the entire team and tell me the hardship that each of those players have been through, why they are the most worthy, why their stories are the one which trump whatever it is. But that's kind of not my point here. My point here was more to just explore the idea of humility and how it plays into the game now. Inherently, I think Klopp tried to instill humility within his players, and he tried to recruit players who had an empathetic, humble element to their game. It's why Henderson was inherently a good captain at Liverpool at the time because of his humility. He wasn't the best player on the team. Technically, he was fantastic. Leadership-wise, he was fantastic, but he wasn't the best player on the team. He embodied a lot of those elements. Like James Milner said, we want no one. Do you know what I'm saying? So all of our history, the recent years, the struggle, the falling short, all those things are feeding into this moment, and they make it multiply. They make it feel different, inherently satisfying. But remember, there's a process to be served here. And what I'm saying, this might be we're probably at the middle of the process because of Klopp's rebuild. He spoke, there was that quote I saw the other day online of, when I said Liverpool 2.0, I didn't mean I'd always be here for it, or I didn't mean always with me. I loved that quote because it showed, again, the humility of the man. But what I loved about that was, first of all, it showed there was a bigger vision than just being at the club, should we say, and always being there. But what he was showing was there was a bigger vision than just him, and that he fit into an institution that he was trying to build. And I really just want to make sure that, to an extent, like we're not losing sight, or I'm not losing sight. I'm just talking about my perspective. But as a collective, maybe I like having my experience, so I want to share it with you. That I keep my eyes on that, and why that feels important, and why that feels central to why I love this side, or why I really am invested in this team. Let me know what you're invested in this side. Let me know what it is that you can't quite put your finger on, or what you're trying to explore as an idea at the moment. And maybe I'll pick some of those out in the comments and go through them. Appreciate you guys watching the channel, and I'll chat to you in a little while. Much love.